Today I'm going to concentrate on writing a conference abstract. It is a little different to writing a journal abstract in that you have really less opportunity really to say what you want to say. So it has to be really focused and really precise. My experience really came from my days as a PhD researcher. My supervisor advised me to apply for conferences and presentations and to keep a close eye on calls for papers. And so I found myself on Google looking again and again for calls for papers that suited my area of study. And I find it quite difficult because they all seemed good and they all seemed appropriate. So it was a case of learning which might be best and then learning how to draft an abstract to suit that. Yes, I'm now at the stage where I have attended lots of conferences and given lots of papers following abstract submission. And generally, you know, this is the hurdle that can prevent people from presenting at conferences. So if we can address that hurdle today would be really good. So today we're going to look at the call for papers. We're going to consider how we meet the brief. We're also going to then look at the content that we might include, the title of our abstract, the biography that you attach, and final thoughts. So call for papers, not to be confused with journal abstracts. Whenever you write a journal abstract, you sometimes have a little more room and you know that you have a longer piece to explore. So for example, in your journal abstract, it might be about, your article might be about 8,000 words, whereas in a paper, it is to be presented orally. You will have approximately 20 minutes and 2,500 words would be the average for 20 minutes. So you can see that really it's a shorter piece to begin with, and your abstract must really pull out the essence of that shorter piece of work, really. One thing I would say is you need to be judicious in selecting the platform that you want to address. So consider, is this a platform which has a global reach? Might there be other people there who could be helpful to you as you develop your research interest, really? Might there be chance of collaboration or publication in a subsequent journal? Sometimes you find that a conference leads to a publication, and that again would be a really helpful platform to explore. You can send out multiple abstracts, and I would say this is probably worth doing, but remember that each abstract you send should be tailored to each conference. Sadly, we can't do one and hope that it covers everything. It needs to be really tailored to each conference. What I would say is also discuss the options with your supervisor or perhaps with peers in your department or fellow researchers. And remember that if you are not quite ready to give a paper yet, there are sometimes opportunities to present a poster, to be a member of a round table, or you could consider a joint presentation with one or more of your colleagues, really. And those are quite comfortable ways to enter that world of papers and conferences. I'm going to show you a sample. This is a call for papers. So in this case, we invited papers on Cerebral Dickens, Mind of the Heart, on how Charles Dickens thought, but also how and what we think about him. And suitable topics might include. So we get the overarching title of the conference, Cerebral Dickens, and then we have a whole range of options that we might consider. I've actually cut some of these, but you can see that although it's Cerebral Dickens, we have actually quite a lot of scope within the sub list, if you like, where we can see again and again the options that we can pursue. And so we have all of these. You've often got a choice whenever you're writing your abstract in terms of how you will write to suit the title, or you might want to look at a chapter or research that you have already written and consider how it might fit with one of the suggested subtitles. And you sometimes find this little bit at the bottom here, as always, papers on Dickensian topics other than the stated theme will also be welcome. So you sometimes have one which is saying, and anything else that might suit the nature of the conference, or anything else that might be in keeping with the conference theme. So that's really a catch-all. And that means that even if your interest doesn't quite fit the subtitles, you have a chance still to submit an article and still to really secure the chance to present at a conference, really. So I would say that catch-all at the end is sometimes a very helpful one and a really useful one if you're hoping to raise your work at an international level. It's really about meeting the brief. You have to ensure that your abstract is absolutely in keeping with the conference's aims and objectives. And what I would say is, if you are applying to present at a conference, find out about the organizing body. Maybe it's a journal, maybe it's an educational enterprise, maybe it's a charitable organization hosting it. Make sure that you understand fully the conference's aims and objectives. And then you can tailor your writing to suit that environment, really, and that mindset, if you like, really. It's also really good to think about the 3 C's whenever you're submitting your work. So first of all, it's really important to comply. If they ask for 300 words, including title, you have to ensure that yours is absolutely 300 words, including title. If you exceed it, you may be discounted immediately. If you under-deliver, if you present perhaps 250 words, including title, again, it may look less favorable when compared to other abstracts which had plenty to say and really, filled the 300 words with skills. So comply in terms of the word count, comply in terms of the format, if they want it in a certain style, if they want you, even if they say they want it in Times Roman, double spacing and so on, all of those things. Make sure that you respect the demands and expectations of the call for paper. Make sure it is concise. It has to be effective. Every word has to be carefully chosen and yet purposeful at the same time. And so you may only be writing 250 to 300 words, but you have to ensure that they are as skillful as they can be. So again, take out words that are redundant, look at how you might reorganize the syntax in order to be more compelling, consider the use of a question rather than a statement if it can be more concise again. So again, look at your word count. Try to avoid lengthy syntax which can become unwieldy or even off-putting to a panel reading hundreds and hundreds of applications. Keep it clean in terms of the grammar that you use, in terms of the referencing that's used, in terms even of the free from too much jargon, really. We want it to be easily understood. Okay, so we'll come to this when we look at content, really. Style is really important. You will present this in a way which is somewhat informal. It is really often not good to begin presenting a paper with a document in front of you and read every word verbatim. That can be very off-putting for an audience at a conference. It should be engaging. You should interact with your audience. You should perhaps use visuals or prompts, but you should not be reading every word from your paper. However, when you're submitting your abstract, it should be formal. It should be very well crafted and considered. And this is really the starting point before you can have your interactive, more dynamic presentation. So I would say whenever you're working on this, ensure that it is formal. It needs to be very well written. It needs to have perfect accuracy, really. It needs to be scholarly. It shouldn't sound like a narrative. It shouldn't sound like these are just thoughts that I'm having. It should sound scholarly, where it is informed by wider reading, where it's informed perhaps by other research or your own research. And ideally, it should be fit for a global platform. So again, if you're using terms that are limited to your environment, it may not travel well. It may not sit well with a global panel who might be selecting. So for example, if you were talking about education at Key Stage 3 in the United Kingdom, that's very difficult. Nobody else will really understand what Key Stage 3 might mean. But if you explained that it was education focusing on those pupils who are aged between 11 to 14, we immediately have a better understanding of what that might be. So yes, try to watch out for jargon, try to watch out for words which could alienate others. And you might want to even begin within your abstract, acknowledging that there are key terms which need to be shared and understood and that are significant to your work. Try if you can to avoid including long references. You shouldn't really have a long reference in your abstract. If words are so few, we want to ensure that your originality, that your thought comes through. However, it may be good to refer to a key theory that you want to unpick, a key monograph whose work you want to explore, and really try to develop a way to include that briefly within the context of your overarching question and your overarching research. Ideally, you want to whet the panel's appetite. You want to do this by suggesting a different angle or a new perspective. For example, if you're writing about something which is long established, you want to ensure that you bring something fresh or new to the conference. An example would be recently, I gave a paper in Glasgow about the challenges of preparing school leaders. And, you know, that's quite common, and I would say it's a global concern. However, I decided that we needed to make it more precise. So we then looked at the complexities of preparing school leaders in Northern Ireland. And again, Northern Ireland has had its troubles in the past. We are a post-conflict state, and we have therefore you know, quite sophisticated school leadership needed to manage those sensitivities, really. So again, it was about bringing not just school leadership, not just about the challenges or complexities, but explaining how we need to look at it in this environment. And again, in terms of, you know, as a 2025, how do we look at complexities of school leadership in Northern Ireland in 2025? So really developing it and developing it. It's also really important to take a stance. And it may be that you're testing an idea, you're trialing something, and you want to share that. So this is where you might introduce this within your content. So for example, if we think of Charles Dickens, we think of him as primarily associated with London and England, but actually he spent more time in France than England in his latter years, suggesting that whilst he was, you know, very much an, a native of England and a keen writer about London, he was actually a Francophile and lived and breathed that French environment for much of his career. So I think that's really important, that you take a stance and you can explain it within your abstract. Also try to be creative. You can get sometimes a very narrow title, and it can be hard to see, how will my writing or my ideas ever fit with that title? That can be really challenging. So what I would say is it's about taking perhaps a page, and doing a mind map or brainstorming and thinking about all the different things that you might want to include or that might possibly fit the brief. So for me, what I would do is I would think about the key terms and how we might explore them. So a couple of years ago, I was asked to write a paper for a conference which was about Dickens and glass. And I thought, oh, that's going to be difficult. And I started with a large page and a pen, and I thought about everything I could think of to do with Dickens and glass. And it became a very messy page very quickly. And there were some things which I could have explored, for example, the use of windows in Dickens, about people inside and outside. We could have explored the use of mirrors in Dickens, about reflection in all senses. And even in terms of, you know, like fine dining and tableware, including glasses and so on. However, I decided that I wanted to do something slightly different. So in this case, I wrote about a short story from Dickens called Mrs. Lirriper's Legacy. And in that one, we have a character called the Major, who isn't really a major, it's just a name. And he carries a telescope everywhere he goes. And he uses it to scan the horizon, to have a really a long perspective on life and threats on the horizon and opportunities that may occur, but to the point that he uses his telescope so much that he fails to see things which are close at hand. So my paper and my abstract focused on the Major's telescope, and it was my way of finding a way into the Dickens and glass topic without going down the most obvious routes, and yet still catering to my interests, because the Major's telescope, the short story that I like, is set in France, which again fits with my study on Dickens and France and the French. If you're going to write an abstract, it's really good to have a structure to it. So you might begin with a problem or a research question, and then consider, you know, how that is presented generally. You know, so again, in this case, Dickens is associated with London. You might then want to raise, though, the fact that let's consider how French he might be in some ways. We'll then look at methodology. What texts will you refer to? What statistics might you use? For example, if doing something within social sciences, you might look at the data collection methods. So for example, did you use you know, questionnaires or focus groups? Did you do journaling? You might want to consider the methodology that is used. Then you will form a hypothesis in response to the problem or research question, which should perhaps be shared within the abstract in brief. And then finally, you will consider the significance of your ideas. So we have the problem raised or the research question asked. We have the methodology explaining what you have done in response to that question in order to find answers or to find clarification. We then have the hypothesis formed from that and explored again throughout. Finally, we have the significance of our findings, which can be shared in this paper or perhaps in longer term. So really that is a nice structure to offer to a panel when they are trying to see your work and how it fits within the overarching scheme of the conference, really. So here's an example, and this is one where I've tried to highlight it to help you see the different sections. So in the yellow, you can see that this is the research question or the problem. I'll let you read that for a moment. Okay, so in the yellow, we have the research question or the problem, okay? And in this case, it's dealing with PAAD. It's a form of pancreatic cancer, really. And how widespread it is, really. Okay, then we have in the blue, we have a brief explanation of the methodology. Okay, so in this case, we have a short declaration of how the data was explored and analyzed. Okay, then in the purple, we have the hypothesis being presented, again, briefly. Okay, and then finally, we have the significance of this. We hope that our findings may eventually contribute to the development of better immunotherapy strategies and diagnostic tools, thereby improving the prognosis of these patients. So there's the outcome. There's the significance of this paper, that it could lead to a better quality of life, a better prognosis for patients. So you can see here that although a very short abstract, it covers a lot. It raises the question. It presents their response to the question in terms of their methodology for data collection and analysis. They have their hypothesis in terms of what could be done and how can we explore the risk factors before finally coming to the sharing of the significance and the impact that this research might have. Research has to always be considered in terms of what difference will it make, what impact will it have, perhaps on the school of thought, perhaps on existing literature and research, or perhaps in terms of real life scenarios, what difference will it make to those patients really undergoing treatment, really. So what you want to ensure is that a panel looking at your abstract can see the direction of travel. This is the problem, here's our methodology, here's the hypothesis, and here's the potential it has to make a difference or impact. And if that is strong, there's a good chance that your abstract will be picked up, as it will be offering a longer term, more meaningful outcome than just an interesting paper one morning. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to ensure that others can see the significance and the value and gravitas, really, of the paper that you're presenting. Think carefully about your title. Your title sometimes is written first. People write their title and go, yes, I'm going to write this. But actually, I would say make your title perhaps last and create it in such a way that it provokes thought. It should be concise. It should present an argument or raise a question. My advice would be to look carefully through conference programs from years before. If, let's say, you're applying to give a conference at a world literacy convention, look at the earlier conferences, look at the last few years, look at the titles on the programs and consider how they're written. Consider the length of those titles, consider the detail or lack of detail in those titles. If they are appearing in previous programs, they were obviously successful in being chosen. So you can, in a way, copycat or imitate the nature of those titles. And what I would suggest is that you consider using a question or a short phrase followed by more explanation. So you might have, for example, Dickens and Glass, and then you'll have a colon, and then focusing on perspective through the Major's telescope in Mrs. Lirriper's legacy. So you can have a question or short phrase, colon, to introduce further explanation. You can refer to a key text. You can refer to a theory that you're going to explore within your paper. And these should be there if helpful. They may not need to belong in the title. They might be better covered within the abstract itself. So ensure that your title is really concise and really direct. Things that need to be explained in full can go into the abstract. So you want your title to be strong and effective even on its own. You are often, whenever you submit an abstract, you're also asked to submit a short biography, sometimes a photo as well. And as you write your biography, consider what sets you apart from other scholars. And this is something, remember, there will be a panel of people sifting through lots of calls, lots of abstracts in response to the call for papers. So you want to ensure that your abstract is different and that your biography even comes across as a little different too. For example, whenever I am writing off to conferences, I like to explain that I am from Northern Ireland rather than from the UK, and even sometimes rather than from Ireland itself, because Northern Ireland has a very unique identity. It has a very rich history in terms of its troubles and post-conflict. So it sets a different dynamic if I say that I'm a scholar from Northern Ireland, really. It may be that your university is well known, in which case, great, people will immediately perk up when they hear that you're presenting a paper and that you are a student or a representative of a very prestigious university. However, if not the case, again, you have to consider what makes your part of the world unique, what makes it different. In your biography, you should perhaps refer to work that you have previously published, even conferences that you have presented at before. You might consider ongoing projects. So you are currently working on a study of the last 10 years of Charles Dickens in France, really. Or future interest. Again, that you have pursued a study of English language across 11 to 14-year-olds, but now you would like to pursue a study of English language teaching and learning for pupils of 14 to 18. And again, set out your future interests. It may be that one of the panelists shares that interest or can tell you that there are a number of people attending the conference who have, again, a similar research focus. So again, what I would say is set out the history of your work to date, what you've published, what you're currently working on, what you would like to explore more fully if time should allow. By the way, the biography does not generally contribute to the word count, so you can write a little bit more. And I would say, again, keep it reasonably brief. The panel will be busy, and make sure that those key points are coming through. You may want to mention if you're a member of any professional bodies. Again, this can add sometimes a little bit more kudos, a little bit more kind of professional respect for your application. So again, don't be afraid to name drop if you need to, whether it's a professional body or perhaps even an institution. And again, look for connections, look carefully at who is on the panel, look at where the conference will be held and connections in that environment. And yes, really consider your international positioning. Consider how your perspective from your part of the world may align or completely challenge, a different international perspective. Make that yours. And this is what I would say, whenever you are considering the panel, think about how much they will receive. That will all sound similar. Lots of people write good things, but you have to consider really your abstract, what will set it apart and what will set your biography apart from everyone else's. As I've said, they will receive many applications. If it's a prestigious conference, they will receive many applications, and yet they may only have something like 25 slots. So what I would say is you need to ensure that your work stands out, its uniqueness comes across. And people will say, well, I'm not sure my work is unique. Lots of people have written about, Charles Dickens, lots of people have written about English language teaching and so on. But your perspective, your research, your approach to it makes it unique in itself. So in a way, you've got to let that shine out. And that's something I would even say to my PhD researchers. There is something unique in your study, and let that come through really strongly. It's also really important that you sound confident in your work. So in a way, you can say this research posits that, or this research confirms or reaffirms the view that. If you are too hesitant, your work may sound a little unformed. So don't be afraid to be confident whenever you choose the language for your abstract. You've got to ensure it's really well written. Within 300 words, there is little to no room for error. Get a number of people to read it and proofread it with you. Get people to ensure that it fits. Get someone else to help you even check with referencing and so on. Check that it is the style that they request. For example, if it's Harvard or if it's Chicago referencing and so on. Make sure it's engaging. You want to make sure that your ideas pique the interest of the panel. These are people who will have perhaps lots of experience in that field, and they will have read much and written much themselves, really. So you've got to ensure that your abstract suggests that this will pique interest. And if your abstract piques interest, they then will think there's a very good chance that your paper will hold the interest of those attending as well. So I would say that your abstract needs to be engaging. It may be a serious topic, it may be perhaps even a difficult topic that you're raising, a sensitive topic. But again, if you write it well, you can ensure that you're drawing your audience in through well-chosen, well-positioned phrases that really speak to an audience. One way to do that actually is to consider varying your sentence structure. Mix it, have a question, have a statement, have long and short sentences. Sometimes I find that when people want to write a scholarly abstract, they write really complex sentences which actually lose their impact. They become so long that we're looking for the next break in punctuation, or that we have forgotten perhaps the first clause of the sentence. So what I would say is, whenever you're writing, think about a variety of sentence lengths and structures in order to make it as engaging a read as it can be. My advice would be to read around, read lots and lots of abstracts, read titles, look at what has been successful over the past few years, seek advice from peers and mentors, and be prepared to draft and redraft and redraft. It may only be about 300 words, but they have to be 300 very carefully worded sentences, really. I would suggest applying to a number of sources. So if, for example, your focus is on English language teaching with teenagers, that's fine. So you might then want to look at how we pursue that with, for example, through literacy. We might want to look at it through equipping people for a future world of work. So we may want to look at things such as vocational skills, life skills might be a term that we would use. You might want to look at it from a school leadership perspective. You might want to look at it from a pedagogical perspective. You might want to look at it even in terms of a well-being perspective, helping our pupils share their views and express themselves well in order to remain healthy. So what I would say is whenever you're looking at a topic, consider how it might fit with a range of sources, really. And again, think about the language that you will use and how you may need to adapt it to suit each particular call for paper. Consider different forms. So for example, a blog or a podcast can be very good. A blog is easily written, again, similar to an abstract, can be less formal perhaps, but in a way, every word counts within a blog. You could perhaps consider doing a podcast to raise the profile of your work. And if you have had a successful blog or a podcast, these will generate statistics which can then be shared in your biography. So as you write your biography, you can say that you are responsible for presenting a podcast which had 3,000 followers, which had perhaps statistics, where we had maybe 8,000 listeners. So again, whenever those come through, they can be added to your biography. They can even be mentioned really briefly within your content of your abstract to show that this is an area, this is a talking point, this is an area which piques people's interest and that they may want to pursue elsewhere, but certainly within the conference would be a prime opportunity. So I think in terms of how to write a really good conference abstract, you need confidence. You need to know the rules of the game in terms of how to comply with the language, the structure, the format. Think carefully about your title. Consider if you need or don't need a reference. Maybe just the name is enough or the theory is enough. And consider most of all your originality. What can you bring that is different? And it may be linked to your experience. It may be directly linked to your research. It could even be linked to your global positioning. That is unusual or rare or unheard of in most conferences. So I think my advice would be to look at the call for papers. There are some where you might consider, I can't possibly go to that conference, it's too far away, it's too expensive, I can't attend. What I would say is apply for lots of conferences, and then you can be more selective if you get offers through. Even if you have to change your mind, even if you can't attend a conference, you will then still have feedback on your abstract. You will still know that that was a successful abstract, even if you are unable to attend the conference. So my advice would be to consider casting the net wide, looking at the quality of the conferences, and look regularly, look perhaps every few months and look at the deadlines, write all the deadlines together on your diary and decide which ones appeal to you most. And with practice, your abstracts will improve and get better and better. Also, you can ask for feedback. So if you submit an abstract and you're rejected, you can ask the panel politely if they would send you some feedback because you would like to improve your abstract writing or learn more about how to polish your abstract for future reference. And in many cases, they will give you feedback, not always, but in many cases they will. So it's really a case of having a go, starting gently, maybe doing a blog, maybe doing a poster presentation, maybe looking at even being a round table member, and then developing your own experience. The other way that's really good is just to attend a conference or two. Make sure as a participant, you understand the expectations for a conference so that whenever you come to write your conference abstract and your conference paper, you know how it should be in terms of pace, length, depth is really important. And make sure that you are familiar with how that can work from a speaker and a listener's perspective, really. But remember, your paper will be more dynamic in many ways than a journal article, and therefore your conference abstract can also be more dynamic than a journal abstract. You want to pique people's interests from the very beginning. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah, okay. No, I don't see my camera is now on. Good. Okay. So I'm very sorry about all of our technical hitches earlier. And I felt I had to rush through a little, but hopefully it will have made some sense to you. My big message really is practice, draft again and again, get friends and colleagues to help you read the abstract, make suggestions, and actually study previous ones. Look carefully at the wording, the length of title, look at where their priorities lie. There are always abstracts available in programs, and there are always titles available from previous programs. So use those to craft your own title. And I think never undersell the originality of your work. I think that is really important. We sometimes feel a little intimidated by other scholars. There are people who are, thank you very much, there are people who are, world writers, and you might be there as the first time conference goer. Your work still has its place, still has its originality, and that's really important, that you can present your uniqueness to the platform. Yes, Elaine, I'm happy to take questions if anyone has.
I hope some people may have questions. I don't know. Well, just now I see only thanks in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
Hi,
Sure.
my name is Anna.
Hi, Anna. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's say I apply to several conferences and I select some. Will I have any problems with the particular establishment if I want to publish or participate in some time, like in several years? Will I be in the, blacklist?
No, it's generally fine. Often, whenever you present a paper, it's the early stages of an article. You're floating the ideas, really. You're bringing those to a platform, and you will get immediate feedback. At the coffee machine afterwards, you will get feedback, and you'll get other people writing to you maybe a month later to say, "Oh, you've got me thinking about that." So you'll get lots of feedback immediately. And it's generally very positive. Occasionally you get difficult feedback, but generally it's very positive. And what I would say is you can then use that to shape your paper into a stronger article in order to submit to a journal. You can do it both ways round. You can have your research to paper to article, or you can go backwards, article to paper to further research. So in a way, there are lots of points where you can hop on or off, but you will never really be plagiarizing yourself in that. It will be presented differently for different formats and different audiences. Your ideas may remain strong and intact throughout paper and article, or they may change. You may change your mind entirely. I have changed mine over the years from when I finished my PhD to when I gave papers. And now, even if I give a paper, it will be very different to how it was 4 or 5 years ago. So that's part of your growth, really, as a scholar, really. So no, don't ever be concerned that you can do one and not the other. You raise your profile in a number of platforms, and whether it's a conference or an article or both. And again, consider even unusual things like the blog or the poster display, podcasts. Those can be a really good way of getting immediate feedback and sharing your ideas. They sometimes talk about the cocktail party PhD, which is where you speak to someone and you only have a minute or so, and they say, "Tell me about your PhD." And nobody wants to hear an essay in that setting. but they might want to hear a line or two where you go, well, guess what? I'm looking at how Dickens actually considered himself more French than English at times. And they go, what? And that's enough. So consider almost the cocktail party PhD, how you sell your idea quickly and present it in that manner. Thank you for your question, Anna. Thank you.